Alright, this is the Exotek 104 chassis. Now mine probably set up a little different than some people, because knowing that it's not a Tamiya legal car, I went ahead and immediately mounted 103 front suspension. I felt like that since it's not legal for Tamiya, and locally there's not like any kind of rule limiting things to 104s or 104 base or 104 width or whatever you want to call it. So I just went right for the 103 parts, and in fact I even have a 103 motor set up on here as well, motor box set up. Again, it all fits. It's this essentially the 103 and the 104. Everything crosses back and forth from these two. From here out and here out. The stuff all works together. So on this car, which at my home track is as fast as my 103 that I've had, that works very well. Had it for a long time. At home, it works really well. Taking it to other tracks, part of that may be on your center damper. You have the associated setup in the back here. On the center damper, I had been running like 35 weight oil, and it worked okay at home, so I didn't really fool with it. Go into a different track that was less traction, the car would sort of get into a corner, like say a right hand turn, and it would almost like get to the point where it may have been touching the track. I didn't really spot any gunk on the bottom of it, but it would kind of just sort of do one of these or hitch, or I'm not sure exactly how to describe it, but it wasn't, you get in the middle of the corner, it would kind of almost stop a little bit, which was weird. And I wound up going to 50 weight oil in that damper, and that helps some. And I wound up sending a PM on RC Tech to Mike from Exotek and asked him what he thought. He actually runs 80 weight oil in here. He told me he had been running 80 weight, which makes sense. The thing is, much like in the olden days of touring cars, where they would use really tiny dampers on the cars, like the Yokomo had them, Schumacher had them for a while. They had these really mini micro shocks, and when you run a really small body shock, people would always run like 80 or 100 weight oil, because I'm no engineer, but I guess it's some kind of fluid dynamics thing where with the less flow of the oil or less volume of oil, you need to run a thicker viscosity. I don't know if that has something to do with why all the off-road guys have gone to the big bore shocks and all that stuff. I don't really know, but either way, he said 80, and it's probably something I will be trying soon when I have a chance. I had 50 in the middle shock, which is probably, actually feels pretty good. And again, the blue Tamiya mini car spring, I like that. Red CRC springs, I've run those on like a 3 racing car, the F109. That seems like a good spring. Usually red, maybe white. I tried blue, and blue just makes the car feel super lazy. That's their lightest spring. They have an orange spring too, which I have not tried. I guess with the associated springs, people use blue or gold most of the time, which sounds right, because it seems like most of the 12 scale springs seem to correlate, or their usage with the 12 scale car seems to correlate with this car, because I see a lot of people talking about blue and gold springs for this car, and that's where almost everyone uses on their associated car, and almost all the CRC drivers on their 12 scale car use red or white. So that seems to correlate. If you go to a track and you see 12 scale guys and whatever spring they're using, put that on this car and you'll probably be in decent shape. And the same thing, I got a diffuser on this car too, a really gigantical one. Because I think they work. You know, you may not believe me, but I think they work. I'm trying to think what else here that's something to go over. Oh, also, which I didn't mention on the 103 thing, I like to, on this front end in particular, you know, you have your two screws here. I like to run on this front screw in between the wing and there's the pocket that the wing slides into, you know, right here. And you probably can't really see it. I don't know, maybe we can sort of show it. It might be hard to see. Let's see, how about right there? Anyway, right in here, in this area, the wing slides in here. Between the wing and the suspension, I like to use a 1mm touring car hex spacer. Same thing as you would use to widen out your touring car at the hex. I put a 1mm spacer here, nothing here. It kicks the suspension back a little bit, gives you a little more caster. You know, obviously kick up caster, same thing in this application. What that does is it makes the car a little easier to drive. It's not so direct off, you know, it's not so crazy on coming. As soon as you crack the wheel, it just, you know, goes crazy. It helps your car, excuse me, it helps you just have an easier to drive car. It also is going to steer a little bit more on power, you know, a little less off power steering, which is fine because, you know, most of these cars, you're not using a ton of motor. It's more of a momentum car where you want to keep the thing on power. And that's most of this car. I mean, I haven't run O-rings here on this part, and that may not be a bad thing. You know, it's an extremely stiff car. The graphite is awesome. Sometimes that can help your car be a little more forgiving. The car, you know, I went to a track that was pretty green, and it was like an older building, like probably 100 years old, and it had that board floor. It wasn't like a plywood floor, it was boards, so it wasn't like bad, it just was a little bit bumpier than a normal track surface would wind up being. The car felt a little bit on top of the carpet, you know, it kind of like you just were sort of floating around. It didn't really feel like it was, you know, stuck to the track or dry, you know, just hit this on top of the carpet feeling, which didn't feel real good. And part of that, you know, I attribute to possibly the damper being a little bit too light. You know, I don't know what the deal was with there. No, you know, the same thing. I usually run 100,000 weight up here. And I normally run black springs. I had black springs on there, and I took them off and went to the gold to help the car move around a little bit on the track. So it kind of just felt like it was like kind of skipping around and just not grabbing the track, you know. And I was actually talking to one of the 12 scale guys that was up there, and you know, I think he kind of had a similar feeling. He said his car was skipping around quite a bit too. It's hard to, it's pretty hard to you know, keep a real stiff pan car on a track that's kind of bumpy and low traction, you know. And then on top of that, the F1 cars don't have anywhere near the downforce that a 12 scale car would have. So that's mostly that. You know, so like I said, I'm gonna try this 80,000 weight or 80 weight, excuse me, 80 weight oil on that damper for sure. I want to check that out, and quite possibly even run O-rings here too, just to see what would happen. You know, might make the car a little better in those situations. But I mean, in any kind of situation where there's good traction, this car is as fast as anything, and you know, would put up against just about anything as far as F1 cars go. Because it's certainly, my F103 is definitely dialed in. I'm really happy with that car, and this is just as fast as that in that higher traction situation. And in fact, this car, most of the time when it's good, it almost feels like you want to run more motor in it, like put something in it that's fast, which is not too many F1 cars I'd say that about, because most of them are pretty nervous. So this, most of the time, this is something that I feel very confident with. But that's kind of the state of the F104 Exotek chassis. I understand now he's coming out with the 103, which I'm assuming is just basically a shorter wheelbase. But that should be good as well. In fact, that will probably be a pretty awesome car. I like Exotek stuff. He does nice stuff. And and then of course I almost always run the small battery with this car. I have it laid out for the small battery as far as the electronics go. Again, maybe I at least need to add some weight to the car, because that might help a little bit too. I don't know. A little weight here or there. But other than that, there's really not too much else to say. Car's pretty straightforward, and mostly what they tell you to do in the instructions, if you follow the instructions, it'll be pretty dialed in, because the first time I ever set the car to track, it was pretty dialed. So that is the F104 Exotek.